Welcome back to another Cataclysm card review. Today we've got another new Colossal to talk about, a Druid Legendary, and a lot more cards on top of that. But let's kick things off with Sinestra, the Colossal for Rogue. It is a 6-mana 5/5 dragon, Colossal +2, and it reads your spells from other classes cast twice, which is a crazy powerful effect if you can start getting some spells from other classes. And what do you know? The wings are going to help out here. The wings for Sinestra are 1-mana 1/1s. When summoned, get a random spell from another class. It costs 1 less. And as one of the Deathwing classes, you can also Herald to upgrade Sinestra, meaning those numbers are going to double. So if you Herald twice, these then become 2/2s with a 2-mana discount. And then if you Herald 2 more times, they become 4/4s with a 4-mana discount. So when fully upgraded, Sinestra would then be a 5/5 that summons 2 4/4s, each of which discount generated spells from each wing by 4. So if you got like 2 fireballs, for instance, you would have 2 0-mana fireballs that each hit face for 12, because you know they're casting twice. Basically, you could theoretically deal 24 damage with fireballs off of Sinestra, assuming fireball actually is still in standard format. But you get the idea. Substitute whatever damage spell you want. So there are definitely some scenarios where Sinestra could come down and just absolutely murder the game state. Basically just blow up the opponent with like crazy damage or like just crazy efficient healing or board clear or whatever, because you could get, you know, 4 cost discounts, and that could line up really well in your spells, and it could line up really well with the board state. That said, I think there are going to be far more scenarios where you play Sinestra and you get some random stuff that is either too expensive to play. You get like an 8-mana spell, and even though it costs 4 less, it's still too expensive to play because Sinestra costs 6. Maybe you want to play this on turn 6, not on turn 10, right? You don't want to wait too long. But even if you go to turn 10, you get a couple 8-cost spells. You can only play one of them without some extra help, right? So basically, there are some problems on both ends of the costs of the received spells. If they're too expensive, it becomes too expensive to get everything done at once, and your Sinestra is likely cleared from board before you're able to realize the benefit of the double casting of your spells, because they just cost too much to weave into a single turn. The alternative actually is that you get a spell that's so cheap that it feels like a 4-cost discount is kind of wasted. If you get a 1-cost spell, well, that sucks. I just wasted, 3 mana worth of my discount. So there's no like narrowing of the spell pool or targeting of the spell pool in a way that makes these results like reliable or good. On top of that, of course, as random spells from every class, the diversity of things they're going to be doing is going to be just crazy wide. Sometimes they'll be for like super synergistic decks where they just don't really help you or don't like synergize with you or in any way. Sometimes it'll be face damage when you need removal. Sometimes it'll be removal when you need face damage. And, sometimes it'll just be like healing when you don't need any healing. It's just, the results are so diverse and so random that like trying to pull together like a game plan or a deck that's like centered around Sinestra, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's just going to feel like really, really inconsistent results. Now, of course, if you are heralding along the way, you're going to be summoning basically Sinestra's wings, or what are called soldiers of Sinestra, throughout the course of the game. So you might have a few other spells in hand from other classes on top of other ways to generate them, which we're going to see one in this video. So, it's not just the 2 cards right when you play Sinestra, but keep in mind those will also be even less discounted. So, the first couple you get are going to be only discounted by 1. The second couple you get are going to be only discounted by 2. So it's the same problems kind of exist, particularly with high cost spells, where the stuff in hand might be like random 5-cost removal, random 6-cost damage thing or summoned thing, which it's like just these things don't work when I play my Sinestra. It's like I have to get things that cost basically 0 or 1 or 2 maybe to feel like I can weave them all together with Sinestra into like a compelling result. And even then, you might be waiting to play your Sinestra into later turns, like turn 8, 9, 10. Like, is that too late for this to make the swing or impact that you need? On top of all that, you have to commit a really significant portion of your deck to the Herald cards. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think Sinestra's Herald cards are very good. We're going to talk about them. I think they're kind of weak. So you're like contributing a third of your deck or something to this Herald game plan maybe. The results are inconsistent. It's not a win condition. It's not even really like a reliable stabilizer or board threat. I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing, 5/5 and a couple 4/4s that generate you stuff. Like, yeah, if you're doing that on turn 6 often, like, it'd be an okay turn. Like, the floor is not cataclysmically bad, if you will, but there is opportunity cost there. You have to run all this stuff in your deck, and you could just be doing other things that might be better. So it's like, yeah, it's okay maybe, but it's not great. And honestly, a 5/5 that's summoning 1/1s isn't great either. There's no way for you to build this effect into your own cards because it's only from other classes that are casting twice, right? Like, maybe if you transform yourself into a different class and then use some rogue card with Sinestra, you could maybe do some cheese, but again, it's just always got a 6-mana overhead. So how much can you really do? At the end of the day, what I'm getting at with Sinestra here is I just don't think the juice is going to be worth the squeeze, as they say. Like, I think it requires a lot of support, a lot of time, a lot of work. And I think the results are just going to feel too inconsistent, and sometimes they won't even work effectively with the casting twice. If you use removal on a minion, you can't remove the minion twice. Sometimes it'll just fizzle out. So I think this card's gonna be crazy fun. I love Thief Rogue. I will play this. This is a 5-star for fun. I do not think it's anywhere close to 5 stars when it comes to competitiveness, which of course, that's what we talk about with card reviews. We're trying to assess how powerful cards are going to feel. I just don't think this one's going to feel very powerful. So now let's take a look at those Herald cards. We got the Maniacal Follower up first. This is a 3-mana 3/1 with Stealth and Death Rattle Herald Sinestra. And man, this card just feels like the impact it's making is so slow and maybe even like kind of disconnected from what I expect Sinestra to do. In other words, like, sometimes these Herald cards are helped because you get the body from the Soldier of Sinestra right away. Whenever you Herald, you're summoning the Soldier. That really helps. You're not getting that body right away with this one. You actually have to wait to see what spell you're going to get. So you can't use this to like bail yourself out of problems unless you kill it yourself, which obviously you don't want to do that. It's like, did this really need to be a Death Rattle on Herald, right? Like, that just feels awkward. Also, it's like a 3/1 stealth. What is that for? Is that to take trades on board? We'll just give it rush, right? Is that to go face? Like, does the Sinestra deck want to go face with a 3/1? The 1 health does get chipped up easily too by so many little AoEs, arcane missile effects. So it's like, yeah, that helps you get your Herald done, but like you lose your 3/1 upside. So it's like, I just like, this feels like slow and clunky and awkward, and I just don't really see this supporting like a Sinestra game plan necessarily. It's like a weird, bad, like piloted Shredder or mounted Raptor or something, I guess, like if you think about it that way, right? I just like, this is not what I wanted out of a Rogue Herald for Sinestra. It just looks bad to me. I don't know how else to put it. This one looks a little better, Rite of Twilight, but honestly not much. It is a 2-mana shadow spell. This one Herald Sinestra, so you do get the body right away. That helps. Get the card right away too. Like, sometimes you're digging for answers. It's nice to get that card right away from your Soldier. Might still be, a random thing that's too expensive or not impactful for you, as we've talked about, but at least you're getting it and getting to see, so you can kind of dig for answers. And then the combo deal 3 damage. Like, that's, we know 3 damage for 2 is fine. This can go face as well, which could help if you're like digging for lethal outs off Sinestra or something, right? There's definitely possibilities there. That said, I think the combo on this feels weirdly restrictive. Like, the one thing about Herald is you want it to like work right away. You want to like weave this in and make sure your Heralds are done as quickly as possible, I think. You haven't played it yet, but it just makes sense, right? You want to like, turn 2, I want to get my Herald out and just get my Herald done so that my Sinestra's ready as soon as possible, right? Same thing with Maniacal Follower. Like, I want to get it down, want my Herald done as soon as possible. But like, both of these have this kind of delay built in. The combo, sometimes this just won't be a card you can play on turn 2 to weave in to get your Herald achieved. So you're gonna have to push it back to turn 3 or turn 4. And then like, that just kind of stacks up. All those little delays keep pushing your Sinestra back further and further sometimes. And that's a problem for a card that I think is already pretty low impact on board. So like, it's fine, 2-mana deal 3. We know that can work, but you're not going to run that just for 2-mana deal 3. You're not going to run this outside of a Sinestra deck. So it still kind of has its fate brought down, I think, by the entire package. And that's going to be a limiter for Rite of Twilight. So I don't think either of these is really an inspiration or a reason to run Sinestra. And in fact, maybe even the opposite. They kind of like discourage me a little bit from running Sinestra. Again, I'll do it for fun. I just don't think these are going to be particularly good. So next up for Rogue here, we have Stolen Power, 3-mana shadow spell. Get a random shatter card from another class. It's already combined. Now you may remember shatter cards we looked at, a couple earlier in the review season so far. There will be more revealed. These basically, you know, when they enter your hand, they split in two. And then once all the cards between them are removed, they combine back together, but you just get the combined version, which is what you see basically here on screen. So for this one, 2 4/2 Drakes and minions getting a 1/1 buff and Divine Shield. Supply run, draw 3, hand buff by 2/2, which those are great cards for 4 mana. Like, I want to be clear. Once they've shattered, that's, you know, that's a really good card for its cost. The question is it so good that it's worth spending 3 mana first? So far, 100% the shattered cards are not good enough to have an extra 3 mana overhead. There may be like 1 or 2 mana better, but also like they're pretty like situational to a game plan. You know, one is about having stuff on board, one is about having kind of stuff in hand. Do either of those really play that nicely to your like Sinestra Thief deck? Probably not. Now, there's going to be more shatter cards that might fit a little better, but it's just hard to concoct a card in your head that is worth that 3 mana upfront cost here. Particularly because, again, will it even fit your game plan? And sometimes you're going to get supply run or flight maneuvers that don't really necessarily fit your game plan. Now, I know you're thinking, hey, Regis, these cast twice with Sinestra. That's really cool. It is cool, but you're then talking about right now a 10 mana play still. And again, you're going to get these sometimes. It's like, yeah, giving your Sinestra a Divine Shield and a buff and having some Drakes on board. Well, you know, two buffs, but even the Divine Shields don't really stack well from Sinestra, so that already you're running into like some hiccups. Same thing with supply run, like drawing 6 minions. You're probably going to overfill your hand because Sinestra's adding cards to your hand. So like supply run, do you have room for 6 minions in hand? Like, you know, so like the 2 shatter cards you're looking at so far, they both kind of have counter synergies with Sinestra, and you're still spending 7 mana to do it. I just don't think this is ever going to be worth it from a 3 mana overhead standpoint. Again, this just looks really hard to play for me. All right, so enough dumping on Rogue. Let's move on over to Druid with Marithra of the Dream, a new 8 mana 4/12 dragon. This battle cry reads, fill your hand with random dragons. If you spent 25 mana while holding this, they cost 1. So potentially crazy value generator here that could also be like a big board dump if you meet this condition of spending 25 mana, which if Marithra starts in your opening hand and you just like naturally play this on turn 8, very good chance you're just going to do that when you do like 7 + 6 + 5, right? You're going to get to 25 with a little bit of wiggle room even. So you could just slam this on 8 and get a bunch of dragons. You know, you probably want a little more excess mana than that to play a dragon alongside it, because an 8 mana 4/12 is a really bad play on its own right. I think you need to, you know, play even 1 or 2 things with this to make it feel like it's worthy of that board presence that turn. Maybe even hopefully get something that's reactive or taunt to force the board through it a little bit. So there's that side of it. Also keep in mind, these are random dragons. So 2 things, that can be from other classes, but also it's a random assortment of costs. So you're going to get a lot of like 3 and 4 and 5 cost dragons. And there will even be scenarios where you don't really get any big, amazing dragons, right? Like you may not hit like a big 8, 9, 10 cost dragon. You might just hit a bunch of mid-rangey stuff, which will make those discounts count for less and will make that board swing impact a lot lower as well. On top of that, for all of this, you kind of need hand space to really get enough like good choices or enough resources out of this. So how do you get into a world where your hand is empty enough to make this worth it and the deck still kind of works around it? A lot of little weird problems for me to solve with Marithra, and that's all when like she's in hand. When you top deck this later, you know, you might have to wait like 2.5 turns basically to play Marithra with upside. If you want to, you could play her just for regular dragons, but you really don't want to pay full cost. So yeah, a lot of little challenges for this one. I can imagine some big, powerful board dumps out of it, but like it's going to have to line up well. You know, that said, I think this could slot into just like a mid-rangey or late game Druid deck, particularly one that's running Elise and just like needs an 8 cost card. Just toss Marithra in and it's probably fine. But I think fine is actually kind of the ceiling for this one. I don't think it's a win condition. I don't think you build the deck around it, but you certainly have to build the deck with it in mind anyway, as far as like hand size and stuff. So challenging card to get there. I think this is like card 28 or 29 in an okay deck at best, really. You know, in other words, playable, but not amazing, really. Next up for Druid here, we have the Brood Watcher. This time around, a 4-mana 4/5 dragon. With Battle Cry, get 2 3/3 whelps with Taunt. And then if you spent 8 mana while holding this, summon them. So if this were to be played naturally on turn 4, right, you'd have turn 3 before that. Turn 2 would push you to 5 mana. Turn 1, if you were spending all of your mana, would only be 6 mana. This is not a card you would naturally be playing on turn 4, but certainly on turn 5, you would reliably expect this one to be done. Because, you know, even just like a 4 and a 3 is already 7. Just hero power on 2, like you're there already, right? So you could kind of look at this. One cost card to float in, maybe you don't. And then it's a 4/5 with 2 3/3s on turn 5. Maybe occasionally on turn 4 it happens because you've done an innervate thing or something, right? Something possible to get it done. I don't even, is innervate actually even in standard? I'm not sure, but you get the idea. Any kind of mana acceleration that exists there could get this done a little bit sooner. So in essence, I think that's a pretty solid little play, right? You get some stabilization off the taunt, so the opponent does have to interact through this. You get a 4/5 down as well. Maybe a token Druid deck could almost run this. They generally do want to go a little bit wider. This is a hair taller, you know, like kind of only 3 bodies as opposed to many bodies. But also dragon synergies to consider. Again, this doesn't look nuts to me, but it looks kind of serviceable. I could see a kind of mid-range mana spending dragon Druid deck coming together where both this and Marithra look like good options, just nothing absolutely crazy. Moving on here to the Fellwood Treant, another one that's going to require some mana spending. This one got spoiled a little early during my card reveal, which we knew, by the way. Like, we knew ahead of time. I warned Blizzard. They're like, no, we'll roll with it. It's funny. Behind the scenes info here. This is a 2-mana 2/2 with Battle Cry. Gain a tip. Holding this, it is permanent. So, you know, basically, again, you kind of want to play this to get that permanent ramp. Gaining the temporary crystal is, I guess, fine, right? I think that means you can kind of like play a 1-cost card alongside this if you wanted to, but I think you really want to make sure you're hitting that permanent ramp, which means this is not a turn 2 play, right? I don't totally love how that lines up. I think it's kind of clunky and conditional, and it's like, compared to the other ramp that Druid has historically had, this one's a lot harder to work with, man. Like, just like Wild Growth just worked and did its thing. It's like Fellwood Tree, it's like, I don't know. I think maybe some decks will be so desperate for extra mana that it's worth it. I'm not going to write it off. I just think this one's not as good as the historical Druid ramp. It's going to be much harder to kind of find an excuse to run this one, I think. All right, so next up here we have a bunch of neutral cards, which I'll try to move through these a little bit quicker, as I think, honestly, most of them just don't have a high chance to get played. Up first is the Darkscale Broodmother, a 3-mana 4/3 dragon. Battlecry, if you're holding a dragon, refresh 2 mana crystals. So in a dragon deck running lots of dragons, this is effectively kind of a 1-mana 4/3 that you could like play on turn 3 and then still weave in another 2-cost play behind it, which I think actually does line up pretty darn well for something like a dragon warrior who just wants to get bodies down early, wants to get some of that aggression stuff in play, and this is like a nicely sized threat. 3 health, you know, if this was like a 3/4, I would actually like it notably better, I think, but even a 4/3 alongside other stuff, you know, we got ways to like buff dragons, although is that guy actually rotating the Petal Peddler? Maybe not quite yet, right? I think Petal Peddler's staying in. So you know, like this plus a Petal Peddler pushing that up to 4 health, really nice line, right? That's a great turn 3. That's super aggressive. You get like a board builder, you get an aggressive body on board with a 5/4. Like, that's a nice little combo. So I wouldn't be shocked if this just slotted right into like a Dragon Warrior deck as a pretty solid card. I think there could be other Dragon tempo-y decks like that too. This does not probably make sense to me in a more expensive Dragon deck or more of a late game Dragon deck, because you just won't really care about the 2-mana refresh so much. Be harder to get upside out of that. But you know, for a tempo-based Dragon deck, this looks pretty good. Next up here, Shadowed Informant, 2-mana 2/2 dragon. Battlecry, discover a spell from your class, and then that swaps class each turn. So sometimes being able to discover cards from other classes, Thief Rogues, you know, interesting. Thinking about this one, right? That might be cool. I do think there are certain classes that certain decks would value more than others. You know, if you're like an aggressive deck, you might want classes that tend to be a little bit more aggressive, Demon Hunter or something, right? Or if you're a control deck, you might wait for Priest to get like some Priest cards or something. there's a neat idea there. I guess that said, though, aggressive decks probably aren't running a card like this too often. I don't think this would necessarily slot in well to an aggressive deck. I do think like a lot of classes would actually just prefer to have their own cards, though. Like in many cases, just, you know, you have like a better sense of what you're looking for, and the results often do just kind of fit into your class better, obviously, because of your class card. So I wonder if this is actually more of a downside that it swaps than an upside, outside of exactly stuff like Thief Rogue scenarios. That could hold this card back, but I will say, especially in a post-rotation world, sometimes cards like this just make the cut because it's like solid filler, just a little thing to do, a speed bump, generates you a resource. These cards can sneak their way into decks with a smaller card pool, so I do think that could happen for the Shadowed Informant. So next up here is Earthen Drake, a 5-mana 4/4 elemental dragon. At the end of your turn, deal 4 damage to the enemy heroes. A little bit of an ability to reach face here on a body, which, like, it's okay. I think, you know, we like face damage, we like lethality, but I don't think this is like significant enough or comboable enough or like cheap enough that it really lines up into a card that's going to see a lot of play for me. There are some like weird things to do, like Dios or something, but that's probably too expensive or cheesy to be a really competitive thing. And I think most decks that are playing like a tempo mid-rangey dragon build or an aggressive dragon build might just prefer like better stuff on board. Is that reach going to be the most effective reach any given class has access to? I doubt it. Even like Dragon Warrior, I think probably has better ways to achieve what this card wants to do for cheaper, or alternatively, you know, just wants like a bigger, scarier thing on board on turn 5. So this one probably does fall into a little bit of a gap there. The Carrier Whelp is a new 1-mana 1/2 dragon. Battlecry, get a random dragon that costs 3 or less, which I think this is a interesting little tool for, again, faster dragon decks, where, you know, you get a little body down, you keep the hand full of dragons, which you like to do for dragon synergies, and you probably get something that fills in your curve rather nicely, gives you a solid option. This is also a random dragon, so that doesn't mean you can go outside of your class, so sometimes that can create some sneaky plays. When you look at the dragons that are currently available, now this is going to include some stuff that's rotating, of course, but you will note that a lot of it actually is 3. I actually said it's a mana 3, but a lot of the dragons are like 3s. In other words, there aren't a lot of 1s and 2s, so you're actually far more likely to get a 3-cost dragon, at least based on the current pool, than you are a 1 or 2-cost dragon. And again, some of those are rotating to shift that around, but I think that's just always true. Dragons are typically biased a little more expensive, so this reads probably like 70% of the time get a 3-cost dragon, so you could maybe even like play that into your curve a little bit, where you're maybe a little lighter on natural 3s, so some decks could maybe utilize that a bit better than others. I guess the question is, like, do you have space for this? Like, is the deck going to be refined enough that you just have a better 1-cost dragon or a better 1-cost play and more reliable 3-cost plays, 2-cost plays? You don't really want this. That's definitely a possibility. I think if this were like an end of turn or something, and it could maybe stick around to give you more choices and more options, I would like this one better, but I still think it's got a possibility to sneak into some dragon decks. Again, just because pools are going to be smaller, you need bodies, you need stuff to fill in your decks post rotation. I think this is a totally fine option. Next up here is the Dracodon Mongrel, a 7-mana 8/6 dragon with Death Rattle, summon 2 random 4-cost minions. This is one of those just like big, slow, dumb cards that, you know, I think just doesn't really make sense in standard format these days. We need cards that have immediate impact, that do something directly, that don't just kind of sit there and hope to make an impact, and that's exactly what this card will do, you know. It's like the 4-cost stuff is also random, so the results there are terrible. They're not narrowed in any way. They're not like given taunt or any sort of bonus, so it's just a pile of random stuff that's way too slow to really make an impact. I don't think this card will really see any play. Moving on to the Scaled Lancer. This is a 4-mana 6/6 dragon that reads, all enemy minions have taunt. So the idea here is, you know, you get some upside on your stats, getting a 6/6 for 4, but you perhaps realize a bit of a downside where you can't actually use your stuff to go face. Maybe you have to trade into enemy minions too often, which some decks maybe wouldn't care, you know, if you're jostling for the board anyway, who cares? Like, technically also that can make some sneaky plays possible. We're able to like snipe a target the opponent would otherwise like to hide behind a taunt. I don't think that's really remotely impactful ever. That's just going to be like impossible to line up, and rarely would that ever be something you cared about enough to run this card as like a tech card or anything like that. So the question then just becomes like, is this big enough for this downside in something like a mid-range dragon deck? I don't think so right now, honestly. No, I think there's a lot of other ways to get big stats into play. And this downside's actually kind of annoying sometimes. Like, you really do just want to be able to hit face and finish people off. And this kind of hanging around on board could create some little hiccups and problems. And when I compare this to something like the Prescient Slither Drake or whatever that Dragon Warrior runs right now effectively for 4 mana, this just does not compete at that scale at all. So I think Scaled Lancer, unfortunately, not quite big enough. Next up is Bronze Keeper, an 8 mana 3/7 dragon that reads, at the end of your turn, summon a 6/6 elemental dragon with Divine Shield. So if this were able to like stick around multiple turns, you could get a pile of pretty sick stuff. Do keep in mind that dragon does not have taunt. For some reason, I just like thought it would in my brain, and it seemed a little bit better, you know, like, okay, I get some defensiveness out of this. But as it stands, this is really just like 2 cards on board, 2 minions on board for 8 mana, neither of which are really that scary, and frankly, just not immediately impactful in any way. No rush, no taunt, any of that. So very hard to interact through this card at all. You're just going to plop this down for 8, and the opponent's just going to ignore it and smack you and kill you, or just like execute their game plan, play their Colossal, and this would feel like a colossally weak play in comparison, I think. So end of turn synergies, like theoretically some upside, but still super expensive, super awkward. I just think this card basically gets 0 play. Moving on to the Twilight Egg, a new 1 mana 0/2 Death Rattle. Summon a 2/2 Whelp, and that gains +1/+1 at the start of your turn. So I believe that means like before the egg is hatched, not after. So if this gets played on turn 1, the opponent doesn't kill it. Going into turn 2, this would now summon a 3/3. So if you unleashed this on turn 2, you would get kind of a 1 mana 3/3 out of it. If it's on turn 3, you know, you get a 4/4. It's basically creeping its way up to Nerubian Egg pretty quickly, and then perhaps even beyond that, although you don't want to wait too long to pop these eggs, of course, because you want those stats to make an impact. You know, I don't see a home for this right now immediately necessarily, but certainly these kinds of cards have found success historically in Hearthstone. You know, whether that's Warlock or Warrior, you know, there are always places where having an egg on board to sacrifice a body to enable a card or whatever can be a pretty powerful effect. So I'm not looking to see this one right away, but I do think this is a very high potential card that some kind of egg deck or sacrifice deck will use to some degree of success in the future. So pretty good, actually. Next up is the Grand Giant. This is a 9 mana 8/8, and it reads, this minion's cost is reduced by the cost of the last card you played. So basically play a big thing and get a really cheap 8/8 to go with it, which I actually do think there will be some decks that can afford to run this card. If they have enough stuff in hand, typically, where they can kind of, you know, sit on this for a while and not have a problem there, and they're running sufficiently large things, this could just be a little nice complementary threat where you cheat out a big card, or you just naturally play your Colossal or whatever, and you want an 8/8 to go with it for whatever reason as just a bonus. It's actually not bad. That could help you create some really, really big vital swing turns. I could also imagine scenarios where you play this like alongside a card that's otherwise kind of low impact. Something like a Black Horn comes to mind, where like, sometimes it sucks to just slam that 6/6, but what if you got like a 2 mana 8/8 to go with it, right? Suddenly this just helps you kind of soften the blow for some of those low tempo, high cost sacrificial turns like that, where you still get to develop some threat or board impact. So yeah, not everybody's going to be able to do that, of course, because they just won't have the cost of cards necessary. Even some decks that do have high cost cards won't care about an extra 8/8. They'll be more like control or combo focused or whatever. But I think we'll find a deck here and there that says, hey, Grand Giant's kind of a nice free bonus. I'll take a swing on this and get a really, you know, threatening body down. We know Giants can certainly find those homes. So I think this is pretty good. Then our final card here is the Sticky Bomb Saboteur. This is a 4 mana 4/4 battle cry. Give your opponent a 2-cost Sabotage. Cards next to it cost 1 more. So this is going to go in hand. Of course, it'll go to the right side of their hand. So anything they top deck will then cost 1 more. And whatever they most recently drew before that will also cost 1 more. And of course, if they don't play this, then they have to kind of tank that downside for the rest of the game. So at some point, they're going to probably want to weave in that 2 mana Sabotage play to not have to pay the continued downsides. I don't think this is very good though. Like, you know, you're disrupting them, you know, by 2+ mana basically, but you're kind of disrupting your own self by 4 mana. Like, yeah, you're getting a 4/4, but that's not a good play. You're kind of spending 4 mana to hope that they have to spend 4 mana eventually, right, to solve the problem. In other words, like, why make the sacrifice yourself to barely hurt the opponent in exchange? I'd rather just run a really good 4-cost card, I think. You know, of course, there's like some sneaky stuff with this. Give them a bunch of sabotages, do something crazy. Like, I can imagine some cheese and some fun moments and some troll decks like utilizing this, but I think real decks just don't have space for this. The impact is not significant enough to actually overcome the opportunity cost of both running this in your deck and actually finding a moment to play it. Those are two really big sacrifices for, I think, ultimately a relatively small impact to the opponent, and that's really going to prevent this card from getting played. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Sinestra is a 2-star card. Maniacal Follower is a 2-star card. Rite of Twilight is a 2-star card. Stolen Power is a 2-star card. Marithra of the Dream is a 3-star card. Broodwatcher is a 3-star card. Bellwood Treant is a 3-star card. Darkscale Broodmother is a 4-star card. Shadowed Informant is a 3-star card. Earthen Drake is a 2-star card. Carrier Whelp is a 3-star card. Dracodon Mongrel is a 1-star card. Scaled Lancer is a 2-star card. Bronze Keeper is a 1-star card. Twilight Egg is a 4-star card. Grand Giant is a 4-star card. Sticky Bomb Saboteur is a 1-star card. And yeah, that's our latest review for Cataclysm. This is probably the worst scores we've had yet this expansion. We've actually had a lot of really strong cards so far. A handful of 5s already, a lot of 4s. This batch had a harder time getting there for me. I think a lot of stuff that's, you know, bottom of the deck at best, that kind of 3-star range where it's like, yeah, these kind of get played in like tier 3 decks or whatever, but not, you know, not real meta defining sort of stuff. Few here with some higher possibilities, driven largely, I think, by dragons. But all in all, I don't really think Sinestra has it, man. I'm curious if you guys have more hope for this one than I do. I think it's just that randomness, the inconsistency here is really going to hold this back. Of course, you know, we love spells casting twice, but I just think the spells you get are just, what are you getting? How often is it going to work out for you? I think rarely, and you have to run some really bad awkward Herald cards to do it, I think, too. So that's the other side of the problem. So anyway, share your thoughts on these down below. Thanks always for watching, and until next time, game on.